the Disney Renaissance. It refers to a very specific period in time in the history of the Disney Corporation, who I don't think needs any introduction around here. I mean, it's pretty hard to find a person that doesn't know what Disney is. They're one of the largest, most successful, and accredited animation studios in the world. Though they do a lot more than animation these days, that is how they got their start. Founded by Walt Disney and his brother Roy, all the way back in the 1920s. They would go on to prove that, animation isn't just for kids. You could actually make a feature film animated and people are gonna watch it. A lot of people. But like any company, Disney has had their ups and downs. They're not perfect, and despite being just loaded with so much money and so many franchises under their belt these days, they do have the ability to screw up. And there was a brief time in their history, between the deaths of both Walt and Roy Disney in 1966 and 1971, respectively, and the year of our Lord 1989, that they were like, what the heck are we doing? They really didn't know. The visionaries were gone. And they were left with a remarkable amount of talent, but a lot of it wasn't focused. And they also decided to lose a bunch of talent, which would come back to bite them rather quickly. When Walt and Roy died, Walt Disney Productions was left to the management of Don Tatum, Card Walker, as well as Walt's son-in-law, Ron Miller. With those particular suits in charge, creative leadership over the feature animated films fell on the shoulders of Wolfgang Reitherman. Now, Reitherman was not an untalented individual. He was good and very experienced. On paper, he should have been great for the job, but he's a bit controversial in terms of his approach to a lot of the features that were presented during this period of time. Reitherman had a bunch of cardinal rules and a lot of weird management decisions that did result in some products that weren't as good as they probably could have or should have been. For one thing, Reitherman was determined to produce only family-friendly material that was certain to turn a profit. He didn't want to take any risks with any dark stuff. None of that. No scary. Too scary for Reitherman. You can't do that. Maleficent? No, nothing like that. Absolutely not. As a result, a lot of the villains of Reitherman's works were a bit more comical and often not intimidating in the slightest. He directed and produced both the Aristocats as well as Robin Hood. He would produce Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2, direct and produce The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh and then The Rescuers, and in 1981 he co-produced The Fox and the Hound, though that's where he ran into trouble. Again, a lot of these films, like the Aristocats and Robin Hood, had villains that really weren't intimidating in the slightest, because he wanted to make sure that it was kid-friendly. Oh no, we can't scare the children. Not the children! Not the children! Somebody please think of the children! And his staff felt very restricted and stagnated in terms of their creativity. Plus, Reitherman had a really weird policy of allowing old animations from other features to be recycled. This basically meant that they would just trace over previous stuff in an effort to keep costs down. Now, for one thing, when people noticed this, and admittedly a lot didn't notice at first, it made Disney just look really lazy. But the ironic part is that according to Floyd Norman, who was an animator that had worked under Reitherman, it didn't keep costs down at all. The opposite, in fact. It was easier and less time-consuming for a skilled animator to create original drawings rather than try to trace. It was more labor-intensive as a result, so it not only made them look lazy, but in a way made the animators work harder to do something that was dumb. Like, it just didn't make any sense no matter how anyone looked at it, and many of them just despised the method. It was awful. It was just another decision that restricted them, because remember, these are animators that are working for Disney. Disney doesn't hire hacks, okay? These guys are good. And they want to utilize those skills. Frickin' anybody can trace, alright? That's not hard. Annoying and time-consuming, yeah, but not difficult. A lot of the films that were released during this period simply didn't perform as well as a lot of the studio's previous work. And The Fox and the Hound is where everything kinda came to a head, and things got a lot worse. Longtime animator for Disney, Don Bluth, would get fed up with all of this, and leave the animation department to start his own rival studio, Don Bluth Productions, and he took 11 of Disney's highly skilled animators with him. That meant that they lost 17% of their animation staff, and The Fox and the Hound, while winding up being a really good movie, was delayed 6 months. And Don Bluth was not playing. He wanted to strut his creative skills, and he allowed his animators to do the same thing. This resulted in some really good animated films that did extremely well, his first being The Secret of NIMH, which had been originally rejected by Disney because that film is dark, man. That film didn't play, but man, it was good. And it cemented Don Bluth Productions as a legitimate competitor to Disney. They actually had to try now, and for a time they had difficulty keeping up with Don. But realizing the threat, they started making some major organizational changes. For one thing, they had to stealthily dodge a hostile takeover that was attempted by a businessman and financier, Saul Steinberg. In 1984, Michael Eisner was made the CEO of Disney, and he was brought over from Paramount. The following year, Peter Schneider was hired as president of Disney's feature animation department, and it would eventually be rebranded as Walt Disney Feature Animation. But at first, their plan was to stop focusing on animation. They decided it would be better to focus on live-action filmmaking instead, despite the fact that the animation was kind of what had built the company in the first place. I mean, when you think of Disney, yeah, they do have a lot of live-action stuff, sure, but most people, their first thought is usually their favorite Disney animated film, not anything live action. The animated stuff wound up being thrown on the back burner, and the whole department was moved from the main Disney lot to a temporary location in a bunch of hangars, warehouses, and trailers in Glendale. It was supposed to be temporary, but they would stay there for 10 years. It didn't help that when they did try to go dark, as Don Bluth had done, they would create The Black Cauldron. It was the first Disney animated film to receive a PG rating, and it was a commercial failure. It didn't even get half of its budget back, and it dealt a serious blow to Disney's animation department, putting the whole thing in jeopardy. I'm sure plenty of you will enter the comments and say, actually, I really like The Black Cauldron, and I'm not going to argue with you. It has developed a cult following over the years, but Disney didn't even bother to release the film on home media until 1997, because of how bad it did, financially speaking. And remember, they are an animation studio. They have to make money, okay? It's business. Yes, they are creating art, but they're creating art so people pay to see it. And if people aren't paying to see it, they aren't going to be able to make more, you know? It's just the way the world works. You need resources, you need financial backing, and The Black Cauldron didn't make any of its financial backing back. It lost money, and that's really bad. But they decided to get a bit more experimental, and they founded a brand new television animation division, something they had not been focused on before at all. It's now known as Disney Television Animation, and it would go on to produce some really good classic shows, like DuckTales, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, Darkwing Duck, and my personal favorite, Tailspin. But the idea of a feature animated movie was still, well, concerning. However, Roy E. Disney, son of Roy O. Disney and nephew of Walt, would step in to try to fix the situation. He had resigned from the company in 1984, but he still owned a lot of stock, and he would speak directly to Eisner and ask to come back and supervise the animation department, as, in his opinion, that was Disney's core business. Eisner was open to letting a member of the Disney family actually try to fix this problem because he could understand that animation was a big part of the corporation's history, so Roy E. was allowed to come back. In 1986, they would release The Great Mouse Detective. That was just a few months before Don Bluth's next movie, An American Tail. Now, technically speaking, An American Tail did beat out The Great Mouse Detective. It would go on to become the highest-grossing animated film to that date. But The Great Mouse Detective did do alright on its own. It was a financial success and was critically acclaimed. It didn't beat Don Bluth, but it did succeed, and that instilled confidence in the animation department that they desperately needed after the Black Cauldron debacle. Oliver and Company would come out in 1988, and that would come out on the exact same day as Don Bluth's The Land Before Time. Now, Land Before Time would go on to be globally the highest-grossing animated film to that date, but Oliver and Company beat it in the domestic market. O&C made more money in the United States than The Land Before Time did. So they were making up ground, and it also instilled better public confidence in Disney movies. People were more willing to come out to see a Disney movie. During the 80s, they would collaborate and help produce Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which did extremely well. It's still a classic, I don't think it needs any introduction. And Don Bluth wasn't their only influence when it came to how they were trying to make up better ground in terms of their animation practices. Japanese animation, anime, was starting to become very well known in America. It wasn't as popular as it is today, but it was getting there, as a lot of Japanese studios had a lot of talent, and dubbing companies were starting to do a much better job of providing anime with English voiceovers so people could watch them without subtitles. This combination meant there were a lot of movies coming over from Japan that were attracting public attention as well as influencing Disney. Glenn Keane, who was a leading animator over at Disney Films, credited Hayao Miyazaki as a huge influence on them because, well, he was producing some real quality stuff. All this influence and mistakes being made and trying to fix their problems did eventually pay off, though, because in 1989, the Disney Renaissance officially began with the release of The Little Mermaid. That particular project actually dated back quite a ways. Walt himself wanted to make a Little Mermaid movie right after Snow White, but for various reasons he was forced to cancel it. They decided to revive the project and make it into an animated musical, much like a lot of their old stuff had been. Little Mermaid proved to be a remarkable success. It smashed the box office, garnering a higher weekend gross than Don Bluth's latest movie, All Dogs Go to Heaven, which came out on the same day. Little Mermaid would break The Land Before Time's record of highest grossing animated film as well. Disney had finally gotten the groove back, as well as stumbled upon a winning formula. Basically every movie after this, all throughout the 90s, would follow a very similar style that The Little Mermaid had helped establish. It started off weirdly with The Rescuers Down Under, as it was the first sequel produced by Walt Disney Feature Animation, and though it was received positively, it didn't do financially as well as The Little Mermaid, though it is relevant as the first film to be completely produced using Disney's new computer animation production system, or CAPS. Every single film after this would use that new system, and it would result in some pretty amazing works. Throughout the 90s, Disney was on fire in the most positive way. They produced banger after banger. We're talking about Tale as Old as Time, Song as Old as Rhyme, Beauty and the Beast. We're talking about making way for Prince Ali with Aladdin. You'd better be prepared for The Lion King. Can you paint with all the colors of the wind, Pocahontas? There's so much hellfire with The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Zero to Hero with Hercules, Be a Man with Mulan, and of course, You'll Be in My Heart with Tarzan. From 1989 to 1999, Disney produced some of their best and most cherished works in their entire history, with The Rescuers Down Under being the only odd one out in 1990, and 1993 being a weird year, because that year, their works were kinda outsourced, and the movie that came out was The Nightmare Before Christmas, which was not created in-house, though it was a very good movie and successful, and it was the first animated film to receive a nomination for Best Visual Effects from the Academy Awards, though it would lose to Jurassic Park, which... okay, that's fair.
Boy, do I hate being right all the time.
But I mean, Disney was on it throughout the entire Renaissance. I'm sure plenty of you will have different opinions regarding the overall quality of these movies, but let's be completely honest, you can sit down and watch pretty much any of the films I just listed and have a really good time. In terms of my personal favorites, it's Aladdin and Mulan. They're both great. They're both just great films. And in terms of my least favorites, well, Pocahontas is the one that's least critically acclaimed, and I'm pretty sure it's for the same reason why I don't care for it. They didn't take an actual old story or legend. They took real historical figures and basically told a tale that has almost zero basis in fact. And Hercules irritated me because of the portrayal of Zeus as a dedicated family man, which is friggin' hilarious, and Hades as the villain, when Hades was always actually one of the most reasonable Greek gods. His interaction with Hercules, who should be called Heracles if it's Greek, Hercules is his Roman name, but whatever, everyone uses the Roman name, I don't even care anymore. In the actual legends was in his 12th labor, where Hercules just asks him if he could take Cerberus out of the underworld, and Hades is like, yeah, just don't use any weapons because I don't want you to hurt my dog. Like, he just said yes, like he's a really chill god. But they made him a more devilish villain, though admittedly it was very entertaining. Regardless, in terms of financial income, well, all the films I've mentioned were financially successful, though that's a wide margin. In terms of the least financially successful, The Rescuers Down Under only made a bit over $47 million, compared to a $27 million budget. The most successful by far was The Lion King, which had a budget of $45 million and grossed worldwide over $968 million. It almost hit $1 billion. And I mean, I think most of you have seen The Lion King. Yeah, it's fair to understand why. The point is, the Renaissance was amazing when it came to Disney animation. But it did eventually come to an end. Tarzan is generally viewed as the last of the Renaissance period. And the reason is that the films after it were a lot different. There was Fantasia 2000, which was a sequel to the original Fantasia, and while both are considered classics, they weren't financially successful, really, at all. So that's a running trend with Fantasia. And the two major films of the year 2000 consisted of Dinosaur and The Emperor's New Groove. Both films, regardless of what you think of them, personally I think The Emperor's New Groove is great, in particular, are a lot different than the ones that came out during the Renaissance period. Dinosaur was full-tilt CGI, which was unusual for an in-house Disney production, and The Emperor's New Groove was 2D animated but didn't have any songs and was a straight comedy basically the whole time. True, a lot of the other films had their funny moments, but The Emperor's New Groove was straight-up slapstick. Hilarious! It's great, but it was definitely a lot different. And even after that, they continued being experimental, with films like Atlantis and Treasure Planet. Personally, Atlantis is actually my favorite Disney movie ever, but this is where Disney went into a slump again, unfortunately, in terms of financial success. They also went into a really obnoxious period of sequels about that time. They started it with The Return of Jafar in 1994, but then in the late 90s and early 2000s they kept doing this, where they would make sequels to a lot of their Renaissance period movies to try to cash in on their success with mixed results. Some of the sequels were okay, but a lot of them were just kind of junk. For example, I do think The Little Mermaid 2 Return to the Sea is watchable. It's not as good as the original, but it's interesting to see Ariel's daughter become the focus. I mean, it was a neat idea. The third Aladdin movie was actually legitimately great, so there was that one. But then we had the likes of Pocahontas 2, which I don't want to talk about Pocahontas 2, okay? It wasn't very good. But regardless, the Renaissance period was still really great for Disney, and it had a huge impact on other films, even Don Bluth. Anastasia, in particular, was largely influenced by the Disney Renaissance film, to the point that a lot of people make the mistake of thinking it's a Disney film. It is not. It is Don Bluth. But it was that close, because even he had to admit that Disney was actually delivering. They even went back to some of their darker roots and made intimidating villains, sometimes really pushing the envelope.
Hellfire! Dark fire!
Yeah, see, what the heck was that? Oh, it's okay, that was an exception. It's Frollo, he's weird, okay? They wouldn't do anything like that again.
Barely even human! Drive them from our shore!
Okay, they did it a few times. The point is, they weren't afraid to have an intimidating and legitimately scary villain. That's one of the things that made the Disney Renaissance movies so good. But as I said, the Renaissance did end. Granted, they did go through a revival era as well, starting with The Princess of the Frog. That period is different, but offered a similar cycle of great movies doing extremely well, delivering great stories to critical acclaim and financial success. More recently, they've kind of fallen out of favor a bit more. Wish didn't do so hot. Not so hot. But these kind of ebbs and flows have become a little normal for Disney. I'd wager in a few more years they'll figure themselves out again and we'll get another period of solid animated films. In terms of how they'll be animated, I don't know. because a lot of people are begging them to go back to 2D animation instead of the 3D stuff we've been getting. Granted, the 3D animated films, like Moana Tangled and the Frozen movies, are fantastic, like they're absolutely gorgeous. There's still something people miss about the 2D stuff that The Princess and the Frog gave us, but there hasn't really been much like that since. Regardless though, that's the tale of the Disney Renaissance. And they've also decided to take those Renaissance films and start remaking them in live action. And that's been a pretty mixed bag, guys. I don't know. I think it's time to stop on that, because it's not really. Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin were okay. It did well considering, financially especially. But then you got like The Lion King, and Mulan was awful. God, you ruined Mulan. How did you ruin Mulan? Just make what you did before, but in live action. Why do you have to ruin it? It was awful. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Jack Carson's Rubber Videos, Lord Off 444, iSurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redline, NS Productions 8104, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, Josh Johnson, Caleb Rainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Dolinsky, JBL Explorers, Tommy Rossini, Ben Nicola, Panzer Kitson 131-232, Mark Holding, Mr. Teroval, Hayden DeGrow, Kurt Forcum, Harry, Drew Dupree, George Kenny, Kevin Wood, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Hannah Bird, Duraushi, William Nemo, Dr. Racious 78, Shimasu, Metal for Life Guy, Andrew Bowen, Crimson Rose, Ryan Wehofer, Zintek M, Boss K, Orange Glass, Andy, Ohio Trucker 1, Windy City Rails, John Videola, Extra Special J, Bob Condirk, Jared Brussel, Daryl Williams, DE Ultra, Connor Hahn, Brian Philly, Nathaniel Brown, Liam Wright, Mr. Sleepy, NJ1969, Rashad Austin, Westmos, DFL Church, Caleb Crosswhite, Profound Punk, The Baxter, Jonathan Goko, Murder Drone Stall, Bad Train Punter Best, Raymond Zabo, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness and a Bijuela Fun. Farewell.